Welcome, modern day mystics, fellow truth seekers, James and Justin, back again with another reaction video. And seeing as we're in the Halloween season, let's take a look at the Dark Lord, Aleister Crowley.
Uh-oh.
This video is done by Biographics. So yeah, I won't keep you guys waiting. Let's get into it.
Aleister Crowley may just be one of the most interesting men who ever lived. He was a self-proclaimed magician, scholar, writer, and even an undercover spy. He was known as the Great Beast 666 because some believe that he was the Antichrist written about in the Book of Revelation. Others believe that he was a genius and a visionary, and that the world would not be the same if it wasn't for his teachings. Well, today we're going to talk about the life of this legendary figure, and you yourself can decide if he truly was the wickedest man alive. In 1875, Aleister Crowley was born in Warwickshire, England, to two extremely religious parents. His grandfather had a successful distillery business, and yet his father never wanted to spend any of the money because he believed drunkenness was a sin. He became a preacher instead and passionately evangelized the teachings of a fundamentalist Christian group called the Plymouth Brethren. They taught young Edward to live life as simply as possible, and that men, they only existed in order to serve God. Any form of excess, whether it was spending money, dressing in nice clothes, or eating more than was absolutely necessary, was considered a sin, and the temptation to indulge in anything was seen as the work of the devil. When he was very young, Edward looked up to his father and wanted to become a preacher just like him. He obeyed his parents' every demand, and instead of going outside to play with the other children, he instead studied the Bible. As you might imagine, this did not make him a very popular boy in school, and he was bullied mercilessly by the other children. His father, he died of tongue cancer when he was only 11, and he was left in the care of his overzealous mother. Living under such harsh conditions on a daily basis made Edward very sick. The doctors said that he was so weak he would die within just a few months if no changes were made. Thankfully, his uncle stepped in and suggested that maybe the boy needed to live in the countryside. Edward moved in with his uncle and began mountain climbing and running through the forest where he breathed fresh air. His uncle allowed him to have fun, which was a concept that had been completely foreign to him up until that point. He even brought him to pubs and let him drink underage and paid for a prostitute so that he could lose his virginity at the age of 15. After all, the doctors said that he might die soon, so his uncle wanted him to experience as much fun as possible with the time he had left. His health, though, it fully recovered, and he was sent back to live with his mother. But Edward had changed in his time away, and he was now in full-blown teenage rebellion. He knew that the Plymouth Brethren were to blame for his sickly childhood, and he rejected all of their religious teachings. He no longer wanted to be a preacher, and he wanted the free will to make his own life choices. He hated the idea that nearly everything that made people happy was considered to be a sin. His mother was shocked that her obedient son had changed so much in his time away, and said that he'd become the beast from the Book of Revelation. After arguing with her, he decided that if he needed to commune with the devil in order to live his life according to his own rules, well, so be it. He would become the beast that his mother said he was. One of the first wicked things he did was have sex with the maid on his mother's bed, just to spite her. When she found out, she fired the maid immediately, and the poor girl's reputation was ruined to the point where she could no longer work. The maid was forced into prostitution, and Crowley claimed that she became Jack the Ripper's first victim. He even said that he knew the Ripper personally and that he was an occultist. Later, he would write about his formative years. "I was in the death struggle with self. God and Satan fought for my soul those long 3 hours. God conquered. Now I have only one doubt left. Which of the twain was God?" When Crowley graduated high school, he was sent away to Cambridge, where he introduced himself to his new classmates as Aleister Crowley. He joined the chess club and was able to win several competitions. In 1898, when Aleister was 22 years old, he fell in love with a fellow classmate, Herbert Jerome Pollitt. Very few people in the school knew that Herbert had an alter ego dressing in drag in private nightclubs as Diane de Rougy. Crowley wrote love poems about Herbert, and they are filled with anguish about his wish to be with him. Clearly, his bisexuality was even more motivation to reject Christianity. In the eyes of the church, his love for Herbert was considered to be an abomination. After graduating from university, Aleister inherited the Crowley family fortune and he could finally do whatever he wanted. He began to hire female prostitutes nearly every day and he bought books on the occult. He was writing dirty poetry and publishing them overseas under a pen name. When he was in his early 20s, he found out that he was not alone in his fascination with the occult and the possibility that magic could be real. He joined a group of aspiring wizards called the Order of the Golden Dawn, which had famous members like poet William Butler Yeats and Bram Stoker, the author of Dracula. They claimed that they had translated ancient Egyptian texts, old grimoires filled with ancient spells, and Jewish mysticism from the Kabbalah. They believed that they could perform real magic, communicate with...
What a story so
Yeah,
far.
somebody should make a biopic about this. First of all, this video is very good. I didn't know the thing about him being bisexual. That's news to me.
Yeah.
And second of all, talk about a dream team for spooky, like the guy who wrote Dracula's in there,
Yeah.
and
It's
very
like
interesting.
all the right influences. Think about all the things that had to take place to kind of like make him the person that he was, like all the circumstances. And it's like you get like a very strict religious aspect when you're young, and then your dad dies young, and you feel restricted and restrained, and now it's like you're let loose. You're like, well, you know what? I could die at any moment, so I'm gonna suck everything I can out of this life while I can, right? Like,
Well, you know what's so interesting is I've known people who had very religious parents, and then the child of the religious parents broke bad, and you know what I mean, but like rejected the religion and went off and was. But usually when it's like a very strict religious thing, it's almost like I have empathy for parents, like I have empathy for other parents trying to do what they think is best for their kid. But just heads up, when you shove your beliefs down somebody's throat, they're liable to be like, go the opposite way and be like, nah.
Yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean? Maybe that, I don't know. How can I...
That's such a common story. How often have we seen that?
How can I say that to a religious person so they get it? Like, maybe it violates God's law of free will.
Yeah.
Maybe you don't want to do... Maybe you just want... But at the same time, what's more terrifying, at least that's something they understand. Like, religious people understand somebody that's like, I'm the devil. They're like, that's right, you're the devil and evil and bad. Yeah. Somebody that's like, well, I didn't shove the religious doctrine down their throat, and now they're just making me feel bad with their intelligent points. It's like, if you leave the child to be on their own, like grow on their own, they might not become the great beast, but they'll be like, actually, Father, in 1592, like they'll be able to like quote time periods at you that dispel your beliefs. And that's even more unsettling. Like, why can't you just be a devil worshiper? At least I understand that, instead of coming at me with like intelligence. So the bottom line is, don't be a religious zealot. You know what I mean? Like, maybe that's the point I'm trying to make here.
Yeah. Well, and there's also one other aspect to this, especially if you're shoving something down someone's throat and you're not walking the walk. That tends to be also another thing that adds to the rebellion. Not to mention, everybody can see it through whatever colored glasses they have on anyway. Nobody can. It's impossible to hear everybody's legitimate point because it's like just sounds like a bunch of evil talk to me or whatever. You're kind of forced to see reality through the lenses that you've grown up growing.
Angels and get to know their inner soul. When he showed up to his first meeting of the Order of the Golden Dawn, Crowley was wearing a disguise and introduced himself as Count Vladimir Svarev. He was still afraid that his family would find out that he was dabbling in the occult, and he did not want to ruin his reputation. No one was convinced of his costume, though, because he was a baby-faced youth wearing a false mustache and speaking in a terrible Russian accent. Later on in life, Aleister Crowley actually became a secret agent for the British government during World War I because he claimed that he had successfully infiltrated a secret society. Now, technically that's true, but the result of his spy career was probably more along the lines of the Pink Panther rather than James Bond. After he felt comfortable knowing that the Golden Dawn took privacy very seriously, Crowley admitted to his true identity. Unfortunately, it already started things off on the wrong foot, and some people in the group found it hard to trust him. Despite this initial deception, Crowley took their teachings very seriously, and he was able to quickly move on through the lessons. The Golden Dawn wanted its new members to be able to get in touch with their inner soul before they were taught real magic. This was accomplished through a lot of discussions of philosophy, yoga, meditation, and mantras. They would write down their dreams in daily journals and interpret what they meant about their inner selves. However, there were some spells that they performed on a daily basis because they truly believed that they could summon angels to their aid. The lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram goes like this. In the name of God, the God of Israel, may Michael be at my right hand, Gabriel at my left, Uriel before me, Raphael behind me, and above my head, the presence of God. Crowley believed so strongly in the supernatural that he claimed that these were the early stages of a magical journey which would get him in touch with his guardian angel. He openly talked about his desire to call upon demons and the ancient gods. He incorporated psychedelic drugs into his routines because he believed that it intensified his spiritual experiences.
You know, not for nothing, it's like when somebody all of a sudden starts talking about experiencing real magic, but they're like, I was also on a crap ton of peyote. Or like, I was also experimenting with LSD. I actually believe them more. When somebody's like, and then I swear, man, you know, I saw an alien ship. I was high as a kite. I'm like, oh, okay, I believe you. Because then because sometimes you run into somebody else that's like, I've never even touched a drug ever. And then this one time, the book flew right off the shelf and hit me in the head. And like, they'll skip through the most ridiculous magical things. It's like, wait a sec, wait, let's talk about that thing where you said a book flew off the shelf. And they're like, never mind that. I'm like, I have a harder time believing you when there isn't drugs involved. Yeah. Because it's like, okay, psychedelics have the power to, like, you know, if you've been in an altered state of consciousness, you'd be like, oh, time can fast forward and rewind. Yeah. Like, weird things can happen. But stone cold sober, lofty things that you're not willing, you know, wait a sec, you were totally sober and you're telling me you saw a guy float. We're talking about this at infinitum. Yeah. And then like, when they get like, you know, they can't be like, well, I was on drugs. It's like, look, let's not get besides the point here. Yes, I saw a guy float. I'm like, no, we're never moving past that. Because if you actually saw that, that's what you have to stake. This is going to decide your legitimacy. You know, we got to have like a court case to decide whether or not you saw a guy float.
Well, it doesn't change anything when people say stuff like that. I'm like, well, I'm glad you had that experience, but like I can't do anything. I can't do anything with that information because I have none of it.
Some of the top, at least one of the top guru type people have the most, like, guru type people out there have the most ridiculous stories. And I'm like, at the end, it's like a detriment. I'm like, I can't listen to you too much because you've told too many tall tales and you can't share them. And when people question you, like, all right, repeat that, like, do it before us. They're like, they've always got like some clever thing to dismiss it. Like, I could walk on water in front of you, but then I'd have wet sandals. You know, like, that's not, no, do it. Walk on water then if you can. Come on. Yeah. But when somebody introduces, like, I was on a ton of psychedelics at the time, I'm like, well, you do see crazy stuff on psychedelics. That's true. You know, and some of those stories, like, I think DMT, or one of the variations of DMT in the earlier stages, one of its pseudonames was telepathine, because people would do it and then come back and be like, we were like reading each other's thoughts. Again, a tall tale. Unless you do it, unless you go out and find some stuff and try it.
This was all genuinely concerning to the rest of the Golden Dawn. Many of them were teetotaling aristocrats who felt that his ideas were radical, if not downright terrifying. The members did not want Crowley to rise in the ranks of the society because he was clearly interested in black magic, and they believed that he would use his powers for evil. There was a strict rule that no one could pay one another to teach them magic, but he managed to convince one of the members to teach him higher levels of spells in exchange for free rent. In his books, Aleister Crowley casually mentions walking in on his roommate as he was levitating, as if this was totally normal among the members of the Golden Dawn. In 1899, when he was just 24 years old, Aleister Crowley bought a mansion on the shores of Loch Ness in Scotland called Boleskine House, just so he could perform a spell called the Abramelin ceremony. However, nothing actually happened. He never saw any angels or demons, no matter how hard he tried. Apparently, he grew tired of doing this ritual every single day without seeing any results, so he wandered off to do something else. Rumors spread that since he failed to finish the ceremony, this unlocked the gates of hell. Years later, Jimmy Page, the lead guitarist of Led Zeppelin, purchased Crowley's home on Loch Ness. He claims that the house was truly haunted by Crowley's demons. Aleister Crowley's first wife was a woman named Rose Edith Kelly. When they met, she was a young widow who was engaged to a man that her parents chose for her. Crowley convinced her to elope with him instead, after only knowing each other for just one day, so that he could prevent her from entering into this arranged marriage. They ran away on a spur-of-the-moment honeymoon to Egypt together. Crowley brought Rose into a dark cave and began reciting his spells. He was reading from a book called Gotha, the Lexica of Solomon. The idea was that he would summon an Egyptian god, Horus. He went through his chants when Rose's head suddenly fell back. She claims that in that moment she had a vision and heard the voice of Horus. Crowley was frustrated with Rose, assuming that she was playing a prank on him. He had been studying the occult and attempting to summon demons and gods for years, and they never appeared to him in any visions. He simply couldn't believe that it was possible for Rose to evoke Horus when she wasn't even trying. But she kept insisting that she truly did see something in the caves, and that the gods had been angry with him up until that point because of his arrogance. Still not believing her, Aleister took her to one of the museums and asked her to point out the god she saw. Rose walked right up to the correct image of Horus, exhibit number 666. After seeing this proof, they rushed back to their apartment in Cairo so that they could talk about the visions in private. Rose said that Horus had given her instructions on how to communicate with the spirits. She gave Aleister a spiritual ritual to perform. When he was done, he heard a whisper over his shoulder from the voice of his guardian angel, Iwas. The angel instructed him to write down lots of information over the course of 3 days, and he published this in a text called the Book of the Law. The most famous quote was, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." Basically, this means do whatever you want with your own life. Crowley was thrilled with this revelation, and when he returned to England, he told all of his friends in the Golden Dawn about the voices that he and Rose had heard in Egypt.
I love that story, how he took her to the place and did the chant, and then she did something, he didn't believe her. It's hey, you can't be having that thing when I'm the guy who's it's almost like I'm supposed to be the mystical guy, and now you're getting revelations. We can't have that. And then they went off. I love that story.
Yeah. Well, that's realistic, right? Isn't that kind of how it would be? What if Moses went up to meet, and do his thing, and it was God was actually, Aaron snuck in behind you and I'm talking to him. I was but I'm the guy!
Yeah. And then interesting scripture that do what thou wilt. Part of me is just thinking maybe that was just so embedded into his subconscious he needed to have that.
Yeah.
After all of the the life leading up to where he was.
Oh man, I've been there. Haven't you been at the revelation? Haven't you been at the precipice, the sixth ring of ascending upwards, where you get to the do what thou will stage? You've been there. Yeah. Anybody that's done spiritual work has got to the do what thou wilt stage. I can just do what I want.
Yeah.
There's further to go. But you know what I mean? And this is over 100 years ago?
Yeah.
Guy taking psychedelics, going and, impromptu pageantry with his friends, you know what I mean? Let's wear cloaks and talk backwards and do whatever we can do to just get somewhere. Yeah. And you arrive at, of course, just do what you want.
Yeah.
It's, that psychological aspect of your mind opens up.
Yep.
Yeah.
They were reluctant to believe him, and some were angry, believing that he had been tricked into actually communicating with a demon instead of a guardian angel. At this point, they were still refusing to allow Crowley to graduate to the next level of the secret society, so he visited the leader of the Paris chapter of the Golden Dawn, MacGregor Mathers. He explained the situation back in London, and Mathers seemed to agree that Crowley deserved to enter the next level. When he returned to London with his certificate from Mathers in hand, the other members, they still wouldn't accept him. So he snuck into the clubhouse and he changed the locks. The next day, he laughed at the men as they failed to get inside. Not surprisingly, he was then officially kicked out of the Golden Dawn. A year later, in 1905, Aleister Crowley took a group of his friends climbing on Kanchenjunga, which is one of the largest and most treacherous mountains in the world. They got to 25,000 feet, but one of the men on the expedition, a photographer named Jules Jacques Guillemot, was angry at how Crowley was treating everyone else on the crew, and he wanted to take over the expedition. The expedition was marred by arguments between Crowley and the others who thought that he was reckless. They eventually mutinied against Crowley's control, with the other climbers heading back down the mountain as nightfall approached, despite Crowley's warnings that it was too dangerous. Subsequently, several porters were killed in an accident, something for which Crowley was widely blamed for in the mountaineering community. It was claimed that Crowley sat inside of his tent and tried to summon a demon. At that very moment, an avalanche came down the mountain. They screamed for help, but Crowley ignored them and he left them for dead. He later wrote that he had absolutely no sympathy for the unfortunate accident, even though many of the men miraculously survived. Aleister Crowley's marriage with Rose fell apart after the death of their first daughter when she was only 2 years old. Even though they had a second daughter together named Lola Zaza, it was clear that they were no longer in love, and Rose fell into a deep depression. They got a divorce in 1909 based on his own adultery, and just 2 years later he had to put her in an asylum for having neurological damage from her alcoholism. This tended to be a trend because most of the people who even attempted to have a personal relationship with Crowley ended up having their lives completely ruined. It's sort of a chicken or egg scenario. Did his belief in the occult attract mentally unstable people into his life, or was his wickedness enough to drive people insane? Crowley was not very interested in being a father, so he left his daughter in the care of boarding schools and nannies. He started his own cult called Thelema.
What a good spot for the quote that I've said so many times, which I really like, which is, "The mystic swims where the psychotic drowns."
Yeah.
I've walked into, you take a fresh-faced young kid and you put them in so many different scenarios, and they'll be like thoroughly weirded out, and it's a sink or swim situation.
Yeah.
I remember, like, when I was in college, we did a tour of a prison, and they took us to this prison for a career interest type thing, and the guards were just as weird as the inmates, and it was like everybody's just like looking at what's going on here, and the ability to just like morph into to go with the flow all of a sudden becomes a superpower.
Yeah. Keep in mind mass hysteria here. The inertia of this man's life. He comes out and he's like, you know what? I am a beast. In like a very there's no internet. Everyone's confused and Protestant and Christian. And the inertia of hysteria gets out of control. All of a sudden people are like, I saw something. I saw a shadow. And then, you can generate this. There's teams of people that are like, all right, you're going to be the guru. So you sit on the stage, you guys are going to be the followers, and we'll get a business going here. You know what I mean? Everyone be silent when you walk in the room. You can create a vibe of holiness, spookiness, just with some lights and smoke and mirrors. Yeah. This guy was a walking, like a walking story of the demonic and mysterious. Yeah. And he might have been very smart. Imagine somebody crosses him the wrong way and he's like, I know how to get you locked up. I know how to I know a little bit of hypnotism, and I know how to confuse you. Also, he could just be part of the fact that he was an uncontrollable figure in a time where probably most people were
terrified and controlled. Right. And he might have been a psychopath. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you are therefore shouldn't be interested or study him, or it's bad to be interested. I'm saying, but he might have been a psycho. He might have known how to do things so that, because it says most of the people that interacted him didn't do so well. It's that's also the story of psychopaths. Yeah. They have to keep changing towns because they use people and they screw people over, and they can't stick around because everyone gets wise to a psychopath. Yeah. You know what I mean? But I'm saying, you can't mess with a naive idiot that's both clever and naive at the same time. Yeah. I've encountered psychos that didn't know how to get me, because I'm like, I'll be stupid when you need me to be smart, and I'll be smart when you thought I was going to be stupid. You know what I mean? Yeah. The mystic swims where the psychotic drowns. You got to be able to warp with. So if you encounter somebody like this, you're like, I'll talk in more tongues and you'll be more fucking possessed than you. We're going to get into a possess off. And then when people ask me about it, I'll go, I don't even know what he's talking about. That didn't happen. Yeah. Don't fall victim to somebody like this. Just study it and become aware.
Thelema, where he taught the book of the law like it was the Bible. He started a commune in a villa in Italy that he called the Abbey of Thelema. Everyone who lived there was encouraged to do whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted. They took drugs, they had orgies together, and children were running around the grounds naked. One of the rooms in the villa was called the Nightmare Room, where Crowley painted terrifying pictures on the walls. He encouraged his followers to take LSD and stare at the frightening images until they completely lost fear of anything. The neighbors were shocked, and even to this very day, the locals say that the place is haunted by a curse. Rumor has it that the rituals became more and more intense, to the point where they even participated in bestiality and animal sacrifice. One of Aleister's lovers, a woman named Leah, had a nervous breakdown after this, and she went straight to the British press after she stated that one of the followers died after drinking the blood of a cat. The Italian authorities, they came in and forced the group out of the house and banned them from ever returning. The Abbey of Thelema is still abandoned to this very day, and As we said, people believe it's haunted. Aleister Crowley, he visited the United States to spread his message, and he inspired several people to practice the occult as well, including rocket scientist Jack Parsons and the founder of Scientology, L. Ron Hubbard. He taught them how to perform sex magic, which was the belief that in the moment of orgasm, their intentions could be heard by the universe. Unfortunately for Crowley, all of the drugs and sex eventually caught up with him. He became a full-on heroin addict, and he lost a tremendous amount of weight. In the 1930s, a journalist labeled Aleister Crowley as a black magician. After years of running cults and buying properties all over the world, his inheritance had finally run dry. He was living alone in a boarding house, doing whatever he could to get his fix and stay alive. He decided to sue the journalist for libel, even though he had called himself a magician and the beast in his own books. He lost the case, of course, and he had to endure public humiliation. Many people never saw him in London again, so they spread a rumor that he had died from a drug overdose, all alone in his boarding house. They felt that this would be a fitting end to such a wicked man, but in reality, fate gave him a second chance at life. A young woman named Deirdre McClellan approached Aleister Crowley after the trial was over. She said that she had read all of his books and was a huge fan, and she wanted to have a child. Now, this level of admiration, pretty much creepy enough for most celebrities to run in the opposite direction, but Aleister Crowley, he was so desperate that he agreed to go home with a stranger. McClellan helped him get clean from drugs, and she stayed with him through the worst of his withdrawal. After he was healthy again, they had a son together who was named Aleister Crowley. Little Aleister was Crowley's pride and joy, and he felt a lot of regret for the way that he'd acted in his younger years. After living his entire life trying to prove that people should be as selfish as they could possibly be, he finally realized that true happiness and fulfillment, they came from family. They lived in a house in Cornwall where they spent their summers on the beach. According to Deirdre McClellan, Aleister Crowley slipped into a coma just before he died. The sky lit up in a cacophony of thunder as the gods came to reclaim his soul. He died in 1947 at 72 years old. In reality, he died of chronic bronchitis aggravated by pleurisy and myocardial degeneration. His funeral was held at Brighton Crematorium, and about a dozen people attended, and Lewis Wilkinson read excerpts from the Gnostic Mass, the Book of the Law, and Hymn to Pan. The funeral generated controversy and was labeled a black mass by the tabloids. Years after his death, artists and musicians from all over the world started to read Aleister Crowley's work, and it inspired them to live their lives in the way that they wanted. Hippies based their free love movement on his writings, and even John Lennon considered him to be a hero, putting him on the cover of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club. His motto of "Do what thou wilt" was inscribed on the vinyl of Led Zeppelin's album, Led Zeppelin III. David Bowie made reference to Crowley in the lyrics of his song Quicksand. His life was filled with outrageous claims, and without his attempts to shake up proper Victorian society, the world we live in today just may not have been the same without Aleister Crowley.
Man, good, honest reporting. That was a good video.
Yeah, good video by Biographics. Go check them out after this. But I think there's a lot of lessons you can take from Aleister Crowley's life. One of the, you don't have to embody everything, but there is something there about like being, taking control of your life and taking responsibility for all the things that you choose to go do. I don't know. He seemed like he was pretty free, Aleister Crowley.
Yeah, and sometimes you can get a different take on it. This was one kind of version of it. Go listen to Duncan Trussell talk about Aleister Crowley.
Yeah.
There's at least one clip that I remember where I just liked the way his take on it. You know what I mean? From somebody who's actually seems like they've read some of the literature and looked into it themselves. You can get a different opinion if you look at things yourself, or somebody that's had a different view.
And people are, maybe they're not always as, you might find out that a lot of the rumors and stuff were not as true as they actually were. Who knows, right? Until you go deep diving and you get into it.
Apparently Aleister Crowley wrote some really disgusting, reprehensible poetry that, somebody was saying that like he was purposely, if he could spook you, he would. What do you go to a haunted house for? To be spooked out. He would try to freak people out if he could, because he was like, that's just what he was doing. That was the opinion of one person.
Remember the paintings? He was like, I wanted the people to get high on the drugs and go in and stare at the scary pictures until they became unafraid.
Right.
He's so like trying to break the fear in you.
Yeah.
To me, I see that as a good thing. I don't know.
You ever been to it? You ever watched a scary movie? Come on. You've never watched like a thriller of anything. At whatever level you can handle something that gives you a bit of a thrill. Yeah. That was just the extreme version of it. That's like this extreme to like, let's add psychedelics and stare at like things that were meant to be horrifying.
Yeah.
But a smaller version of that is a thrill.
Yeah.
Is see what your fear threshold is.
Yeah.
I don't know.
All right, guys.
Just
well,
opinion.
Hopefully you liked our reaction on this video. If you did, don't forget to hit a like, subscribe, share this with a friend, and everyone till next time,
Stay spiritual.